Got it. We are, I believe I pressed recording, so it should be showing, correct? Okay, good. Thank you. And I really appreciate that. As one, you will probably see my 2-year-old here soon. We've revolted a little against the machine when it has come to a nap. So she should probably be down shortly. My name is Kelly Capper, and I am the instructional coach here at Shawnee Mission West High School. I've been an instructional coach for 2 years. The majority, actually all of my experience though, has been through Title I schools. I started in KCK, off 18th and Cordero at Northwest Middle School. Then I went to an alternative high school teaching 14 to 21-year-olds, as well as from there coming back to the Shawnee Mission School District, teaching at Hawker Grove and Shawnee Mission West High School. Can everyone see my presentation, my screen? Everyone see that? Awesome. And then, like I said earlier, if you, this is shared on that culturally responsive teaching resources. And I'm a firm believer, like I love creating stuff like this. If this is something that you want to bring back to your staff, I would love it, because I think it's just something that all teachers and students benefit from. And the more the merrier that access the curriculum or access the resources. Once again, I already explained my experiences, but the reason why I explained my experiences and why I'm so passionate into this curriculum is I'm a firm believer in all means all. I was raised by a single mother of 6 girls. We grew up in a 2-bedroom, 1-bath house. So I'm really great at negotiating skills, and also I could pick any door with a butter knife, but you don't need to know that probably. But I do share that with my staff. My life today doesn't mirror what I grew up as. That's probably the best way to say it. I'm very blessed because of the mother I had, and also through my work in culturally responsive and culturally relevant curriculum. And I'm UMKC, my master's is in CNI, but my master's isn't in CNI, but it's an emphasis in urban teaching, and I had some amazing teachers. And I really reflect on, and my mom actually was the one that said, she's like, what if we weren't a single mom of 6 white girls? How different would our life be? What statistics would be there? And if my mother can say that, I'm pretty certain that I can take a step back and be like, yeah, I've been blessed with a few things, and my experiences are not going to be the same as everyone else. And I kind of walked into my master's knowing that, my teaching career knowing that. And once again, just really, I am blessed to have the mother that I have. So we're going to start with the presentation here. Anytime I introduce culturally responsive teaching, and some of the feedback was, I would like to know how to bring it back to my staff. Some of you already know about culturally responsive teaching. So I'm going to kind of go with this as, how do you talk to adults about implementing culturally relevant curriculum in a culturally responsive way? So those are 2 different things. I start with the 4 agreements from Courageous Conversations. Now, this is from Glenn Singleton's work. If you're from the Lawrence School District, you are very much involved in beyond diversity. Some in my district in Minnesota, I was fully trained in beyond diversity, and I really enjoyed it. In Shawnee Mission, we do deep equity. But I also think NEA has amazing resources. So there's a lot of different places that have resources that you don't just have to pay a certain amount to get them. Like I said, firm believer in sharing and caring. You can see this doc that's on my screen, right? I just want to make sure I'm doing everything right. You'll see that articles and presentations, as well as these resources here, really diving into different things. So sharing is caring. So back to our 4 agreements. So staying engaged really means staying involved in the conversation. It's really easy to get distracted, and I apologize because there might be a moment where I get distracted and Olaf is on the screen and I got a 2-year-old with their tongue out right next to me. So I apologize if that's the case, and being real and it doesn't even involve like making excuses. like, oh, well, this is this because of this. No, just staying engaged in the conversation, listening to other people's perspective. That leads into speak your truth. Speak your truth. My truth is as a white woman right now, a middle-class white woman, but growing up, it was a little different. I cannot relate to the experience of a 16-year-old African-American male. I can't do that. I can't speak for them. And I will not speak for them. I can be responsive to their life, but as a white female who's had certain privileges just based on my gender and skin tone, I'm not going to speak for them, whether a teacher or just a human being in general. Experience discomfort. If you've had PD around this is uncomfortable professional development. This isn't easy. And that's okay. It's not meant to be easy. We're dismantling 250 years or plus of injustice. It's not going to be easy, and that's okay. If it's easy, then we might be doing something wrong, in my opinion. It's going to be uncomfortable because we're listening to people's perspectives and we're listening to people's truths that aren't like ours. There's certain things that I might do or say that other people react differently than I intended it to be reacted differently to. And instead of being defensive about it, I need to own up to it. I'm like, I'm being real. Part of this work is just being a real human being. Accept and expect non-closure. We're not going to solve all the world's problems today. I'm sorry if you came into this thinking that you would, but we're not. It's ongoing, and this is the beginning. The discussion piece is really important. This is the beginning of this work. And some of you have been in this work for a while. Some of you have really dove into this, so I don't want to act like that you haven't been in this journey before. Some of you are maybe ahead of me, and that's wonderful. But this is an ongoing cycle, an ongoing learning moment. It's never done. I'm always learning. Please do not say I'm an expert in culturally responsive teaching, because if I'm an expert, then I'm done learning. And I do not want to be done learning. Does anyone have any questions over these 4 agreements of courageous conversations? If you click on the title, you'll see just a PDF that I made. You can change whatever you want to about that. It's short little quotes that are from his text. And it's something that, like I said, I've used in my professional development that I've led. I've used in my classroom with students when we've had these tough conversations. I taught language arts and social studies, and those subjects I made sure I had curriculum that involved some discussion that might be uncomfortable. So these kind of guided those discussions, and we talked about it. There's also in the resource document a writing, like a prompt. So where kids are actually, yes, I see the chat, yay. Yes, oh, sorry, I just got distracted. Yes, there is the presentation is, I believe, in this document, the first one right here. Yes. Ooh, did I link the wrong one? No, I didn't link the wrong one. Oh, thank goodness. So yes, it's the first link of it's the first link of the resources if you're looking for this presentation still. I'm going to keep that up just in case. And if you have questions along the way, please put them in the chat. I would love to answer them as we go, or I can wait to the end, whatever you'd like. This definition of culturally responsive teaching comes from Gary Howard. A big piece in my master's, a big piece was, I'm just checking. A big piece was his book and my journey, and it transformed my teaching. You can't teach what you don't know. Oh my goodness, it is an amazing book. It really had me look inside and develop who and really reflect who I was as an educator. And this book is something that I think every teacher should have in their room. So it's teaching and leading in such a way that more of our students across more of their differences achieve at high levels and engage at a deeper level without giving up who they are. That's just important. Sadly enough, a lot of our kids give up who they are the minute they walk through that door. And that's a systemic issue. One example I think of when we talk about PBS and we create the grid and are like appropriate school volume, appropriate school behavior. This word appropriate, who is it for? Is it the white middle class definition of appropriate, or is it a cultural definition of appropriate? And it's looking at our language in small little pieces that because we choose that word and the connotation behind it, are we truly letting kids come in to the school as who they are? I'm gonna do a stop a screen share, and I would love to do a breakout room because I love them. I swear I've used Zoom before, I promise. Probably for 5 years. I probably should get a little better with it as the host. We're gonna do a breakout room. And I want you to talk about how you use culturally responsive teaching already, or what you believe to be culturally responsive teaching. And then we'll come back and we'll share out. Okay? Do that. I'm going to do 3 people to a room. And we're going to go. And then you should get an invite. Awesome. Cool.
Is home and is nice enough to take care, so.
Well, she's asking for coffee. It's not a good time for a 5-year-old ever to have coffee. So.
Yeah, mine's 5. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So as I go off and on, I'm still present, still listening. Anyway, I teach early childhood special ed, but the students I serve are all in our at-risk programs. So probably, I'd say at least 75 to 80% of my caseload is dual language learners, bilingual, of all different kinds. I mean to tell you. So in terms of culturally responsive teaching, I've been going through the new Teacher Center program, and they have an amazing tool called Knowing Students, and it just kind of walks you through all aspects, even in terms of culture, socioeconomic status, not just skin type and language, but what are your cultural norms at home, even if you are Caucasian.
Like that. So I teach 7th grade in Olathe at a Title I school, and I teach world geography as one of mine. I teach world geography and Kansas history. So we definitely talk a lot, especially in the beginning of the years, about cultures and different cultures around the world and things like that. And I like, Kelly, what you were saying about how we can't speak for other cultures. Like, we can be responsive, we can listen to what they have to say, we can be respectful, but we can't speak for them. And I like you say that because that's, I know, definitely a thing that I really try to push in my classroom.
I'm a 5th grade teacher, and I'm actually use myself as a representation of culturally responsive teaching. I'm adopted. I have a father from Arkansas. My mother was from Japan, and I married a Cuban. So we're just a hot mess. And so I usually use myself as an example and the history that goes along with all the cultures that are involved in my own life. So again, I agree with all of you. You can't really teach that to people who are unaware or don't know, but I happen to be in a great position that I can share my own story. So.
Yeah, I teach 7th grade social studies as well, and we focus on world geography and Kansas history. I teach out in Great Bend. 90% of our school district is on free or reduced lunch. We're like 65% Hispanic, so there's a lot of different cultures in there, and a lot of my students haven't even been outside of Great Bend. They're born here, they stay here, they don't get the opportunity, they don't have the funds and
Oh no, assign to breakout room 1. And assign. Yeah, I know. Oh no, what? What? You want to join a room?
Yes.
Let's join this one.
Teachers had the buy-in, but we've been embedded in that work for 5 or 6 years.
Yeah, I think
Kelly,
that
I was
buy-in
just
comes with- Oh, go ahead.
Kelly, I was
I'm
just
sorry.
explaining that Lawrence has had this for many years, and we've been trained by the PEG group.
Yeah.
Sorry, Julie.
Oh, I was just going to say, I think the buy-in comes with comfortability. You know what I mean? Like if you're uncomfortable with it because you're not knowledgeable or in that kind of business, it can be difficult to have I think the conversations are difficult regardless, but I think it's even more so if you don't know a lot about it, you know?
Well, Courageous Conversations talks about you have to see within yourself first, and you have to go on that journey yourself before you can take a class or any students on that journey.
I join this first one.
We also have the disability in the midst of that. And everything that comes with the preconceived ideas of kids with behavior. Of the teachers that I work with, I spend a lot of time. I think I spend more time working with teachers to understand my students than I work with the students and their behavior. And that's the part that for me is frustrating because they are kids.
Yeah.
So and it's just hard because you want to help them, but they have to get out of that. Those kids are tough and I have to be a certain way with them to discipline them, when just take your time to get to know them and try to take the filter that you have, because that's how they should behave or how they should be, so you can see who they are, therefore help them.
So, and I agree with you 100%. My wife is a white female from originally from Olathe, and her first teaching job, she was at Leavenworth, and she would tell me stories about the kids and how tough this was. And she'd come home and tell me this story about this thing, and I go, "Oh yeah, I remember." And I'd tell her a story from my high school where that happened, and I'm like, "Oh, I had a friend that was like that," and she was like, "What?" And I'm like, "You just never, you never know." I'm like, "Oh, that's not an issue, you know. That's why they do this thing or that thing," and it is.
Oh, we're going to close all of our rooms. We're going to bring them all back.
Like her pony.
I know, it makes her look very Lebanese. I might mention that.
Oh, does it?
Oh, yeah. Like the curly and the brown hair.
Oh, we got to put socks on before our shoes.
Okay. Okay, we're bringing everybody back in. Sorry if I ended any conversations. They all were great. I went into each room. I was really excited. I think, yeah. Okay, we're just waiting on room 2. There we are. I'm so sorry if I ended some really amazing conversations when I came into the rooms. They were awesome. One thing I usually say in PD, and I want to clarify too, as a white woman, I can't speak for every other white woman. I had a specific background. I had a specific way of being brought up, and I went through specific journeys. I mean, oh, come here. Something that you might see, not in me, but even my daughter. I'm a quarter Lebanese, and it must have skipped a trait or a generation for me, but that's something that, but I identify as a white woman. So it's not something that you see right when off the bat. You see the 75% Irish for certain. That's why the extra E's in there. But thank you, Mother. But it's something that just because I speak my truth and I start with, and that's part of Glenn Singleton's work as a white woman, I can't speak for everyone who is also a white woman. I'd like one person from each breakout room just to kind of share out what you talked about, briefly summarize, or it doesn't matter who. I probably should have told you that going in that somebody would. So if one brave soul from each breakout room would, that would be awesome.
I nominate Courtney because he did a great job.
All right. So we talked about a number of different things, actually, but the first one being making assumptions and trying to avoid doing that. Sometimes we make assumptions of people, and sometimes they make assumptions of us, which can be difficult sometimes to deal with and to not do. So we have to be aware of those things. On the back end, we talked about a lot of building relationships, getting to know students individually, and sometimes doing things differently for them can be a good thing. Everything doesn't have to be the same for everyone. And sometimes our relationships with them lead us to understanding that.
Awesome. Great. A lot of this work does connect with other work that we do, right? Our SEL work, our that relationship piece is huge. And we'll see in a bit, we'll talk about the 7 principles of culturally responsive teaching, especially in this example from Gary Howard. But part of that is relationships and how we're having our environment be inviting, but also ourselves be inviting to students. Not every student obviously will like me, but as long as they know I care about them and I'll do anything I can to make them be successful, that's important, right? One of the examples I've shared in the past is when I worked at the alternative school, I had a student named Kevin. It was his 4th year in freshman English and social studies. And in Minnesota, you take a school climate survey, and those results go to the University of Minnesota because it's their climate survey. And Kevin wrote on there, Miss Freeman, my maiden name, is the B word. And then right afterwards, he wrote, but I know she cares about me, so I keep coming to school. And just so you know, Kevin graduated at 21, but he graduated. And I was just proud to be that extra push to get him to go to class. But that was a lot of relationship. There's a system let him down for 20 years, in my honest opinion. And I had to do everything I could, and especially in those relationship skills, to make him want to come and make it relevant and be responsive to what was going on in his life. So I love that you said relation. Awesome. All right, from our next group. Anybody?
My group of Brittany, Sheila, and Jordan talked a lot about how it looks different at different levels. So I teach early childhood SPED, and about 80-ish% of my caseload are dual language learners. But we talked about how culturally responsive isn't just putting a piece of sushi in dramatic play or just putting a burrito or a sombrero somewhere. And as we talk about the winter holidays, it's not just touching each holiday that we think is representative of cultures and countries, but it should be daily embedded all through year from August to May. And it looks different at different levels. That was for my level, but then Sheila said, you know what, sometimes it just comes up as day to day, and she might hear a nuance that she can then interject, hey, let's explore that, let's talk about that a little bit, and kind of dig a little bit deeper. Sheila?
Yeah, I agree. I think it's going to look different. I mean, obviously, we have a range of people from high school to pre-K, and so it is going to look different depending on your age group and your group of kids that you have. One thing that I really appreciate, I just have to say thank you, and I appreciate so much that this is even being offered, because I think this is such a difficult subject for people to grasp. And I have to say that as a minority, because that conversation is not easy. I would say that I probably even have a little bit of an easier time because of my nationality and where I'm from to approach some of these subjects than other people would. But at the same time, I also am, I guess, cognizant that in my school building, I may be the only person of color that my kids will ever have in elementary. So I do feel that responsibility, but I just appreciate everybody who's in this session, because it shows that we are really trying to make headway toward making that gap smaller and helping other people understand the situations that are going on, and even more so with everything with the pandemic and everything.
Thank you both. Awesome. All right, let's go for our last breakout room. Who wants to be brave?
I guess I'll go. So I'm from Lawrence, and we've been working on this work for 5-6 years or so. And so the 4 agreements are up in my room. 7 principles are around it. But I'm elementary, and so we take it down, and it's embedded in our class meetings on a daily basis. And so one of the things we ended our conversation about was, sometimes there's pushback with this work, and some of it we have taken it in Lawrence as you have to do it from the self first. You have to look at yourself. You have to, see where you are with that journey before you can take it into your classroom. So you have to look at your biases, look at your upbringing. There's just a whole array of things that you have to look within yourself before you can start doing this work within the classroom and then start doing it with the families. And so it's not a one-time 2-day conference or, PD session. It is embedded in years, building on. And everybody's at that journey at a different place. And it's okay that people don't necessarily have the buy-in yet, but we all then took our conversation to the social studies teachers. I believe, my thought is, and I am on the Haskell Indian College School of Ed board, so we pair with them, and their student teachers are in our building. I believe that most all of our history and our resources that are provided for social studies all come from a white male perspective. And so we have to, as educators, we have to look for those resources that are from true other perspectives. And if we're not, then we're doing a disservice to our kids. So, but that's where I am on my journey. But I think the social studies teachers have it kind of pretty hard because they're not provided with the quality of resources. I think we're getting better. I mean, we're moving along, but we're not near where we need to be. So
I think I agree with you wholeheartedly on a lot of this. Yes. And as a former social studies teacher, I didn't use my textbook. One being in Shawnee Mission, when I taught Kansas history, I saw that the Kansas history textbook was written by specifically a white woman, and then all white authors, and then I'm using these chapters on Native American education, and I had a really hard time with that. So I changed things up. And part of that was from my experience going out of state in Minnesota. They had a specific, one of our standards was multiple perspectives. And every time you introduced a new concept, a new event in history, you had to include more than one perspective. You had to. And I loved it. It pushed me as an educator to find primary resources that weren't the ones that I always used. I think as an English teacher, you also, I think every teacher has a responsibility. This can be done in math class. You can just change the names, you can change the situations to make them more relevant to your students. I don't want to put this all on the social studies teacher's shoulders, because it takes a team, right? It takes a team. They are all our kids. They're not just mine, they're all of ours. So yes, social studies, I made the connections a little easier for me. I made in language arts. I purposely found texts that my students related to. I had some tough conversations with colleagues that I heard from it was easier kind of to do this with the kids than the colleagues, right? When I taught 7th grade 3 years ago, all of our texts had white British male protagonists. And the last time I checked, I had no white British males in my class. I didn't have any. And I was like, I don't understand why we're doing this. They don't reflect who's in my room. So the next one, I was like, I'm doing something different. I understand if you don't want to, because this is what you did last year. I was like, but for me and my students, and I'm teaching all the co-taught classes and all the ELL co-taught classes, we're doing a different book. And I had to put my foot down for my kids in that regard. But that was something that I want to say, it's a tough conversation, but I think everyone learned in that regard. I wasn't going to make somebody else change what they were doing, but I wanted to model that I was making that change. Yeah. Okay, we're going to share my screen again, because we're already at 34 minutes, and I don't want to have you going through this till about dinner time. I know everyone else has people to be with at home too. It's a lot, and you could go for hours and multiple time, and that's why I kind of put a lot of those resources in that doc, because then if you want to on your own time, then you can do that as well. I saw in the chat that there was a rubric, something, and it was, I met your coordinator for Indian education in Lawrence, and she really pushed me to create some documents, and I was so happy to meet her, and I cannot remember her name, and I feel like a terrible person. She's fantastic.
Jennifer.
Yes.
Jennifer Atakini.
Yes. She is a rock star. So finding those resources within your own district are really great, or finding them outside of your district. Olathe, I know you have Tina Ellsworth, and I've sat down with Tucker, and I'm like, oh, starstruck. But multiple people in multiple districts have amazing people, and you all are resources, whether it's from this or from earlier. You are resources now to each other. I want to show you one of the things that we did. This culturally responsive curriculum. This could be in any class, as well as choosing a classroom text or rubric questions. Oh, love that. Sorry, talking to my computer. Hope I'm not the only one that does that. If you open those documents, this is something that I hope you add to. And if you don't have access to add, then I'm going to change it because I really want you to add, because this is from a collaboration of people. So we add different resources based on ethnicity, and then we have novels, poems, essays, and short stories. All of the essays and short stories are hyperlinked, because as an English teacher, that was really hard for me to find essays and short stories. But this is secondary, because my experience is in secondary. So if you are elementary, I push you to create one for elementary, because that would be amazing. And then this rubric is really just for you to see supporting curriculum standard, relation to students, author authenticity, big, textual planning, and then just kind of you evaluating the text that you're utilizing in your classroom. And if you don't use a lot of text in your classroom, I'm going to be an ELA nerd and say every student should be reading, listening, writing, or speaking every day in class. But if obviously some lessons don't work that way, and some people just like to write, so there's a writing version as well as a rubric version. So just so you have some of those resources there for you. We'll go back here. What does it mean to be culturally responsive? So culturally responsiveness is the ability to learn from and relate respectfully with people of your own culture as well as those from other cultures. I have 5 sisters. I don't relate to all of them right now. We all have different lives, and it's we grew up from the same home, but sometimes it doesn't seem like we grew up from the same home, if that makes sense, because we're sisters. And we chose different paths. So now we're our own self. And our conversations at home are really interesting. One of my sisters is a executive human resources executive for a tech company, and she's the only female on that board. So our conversations, I'm just sitting there listening. I'm like, oh my gosh, he said what? And she's like, yeah, he told me to make his coffee. And then I said, I don't even make my own coffee. And I'm like, what? You said that? How did you get the confidence to do that? So I'm learning constantly from them. I have a sister who's a single mom of 2 girls, and learning from her, especially right now, at home, working and taking care of those 2 young girls, and one, an 8-year-old girl who is autistic, and then a 5-year-old girl, and she's trying to be everything. I have another sister who has, and you all have siblings or friends who are going through similar. One sister who is working from home and my nephew has a rare neurological disease. Only 100 kids are identified with this disease, and they're still in the process of trying to go through clinical trials, and this kind of put it back, right? So listening to her perspective of everything that's going on, she has to be the speech therapist. She has to work from home. She has to be the physical therapist, the teacher, and she also has a 4-year-old. So, and her husband is there, and they're both doing everything they can, but I just listen. I think that's the biggest part of growing in this journey. You listen to people, and you actively listen and truly listen, not just listen to respond. People sometimes get those confused. Listen to listen and listen to respond. I catch myself every now and then. I'll listen and I'm like, no, this is how I'm going to respond. This is what I'm doing. And then I have to take a step back. I'm like, no, stop doing that. Listen, just listen to listen. Going through the next slides, we're not going to go over it as a discussion piece. But these pictures I've used in PD, we've used it in our deep equity PD, and we've kind of talked about which picture represents equality, which picture represents equity, what's the difference between the two. But something that some people have seen or maybe not is the next frame. What happens? Should we take away the boxes or the fence? Why is the fence there? Why is it even there for our kids? And that piece, I didn't really see that until I saw it on Facebook probably a couple of months ago, and I was like, huh. And I kind of had this conversation with my husband. I'm like, Why is there a fence? Why? And then that reality piece is huge. We'll go into the 7 principles of culturally responsive teaching. If you go to, yes, thank you for adding more. Yay. I saw that. Into the resources right here, the 7 principles of culturally responsive teaching with examples. Student, oh my goodness. Yeah, do you need bubbles? Okay, hold on. Sorry, bubbles are life. Frozen and Bubbles and Elmo. So these all, like some other authors have different principles, this and that, but I do think, I really like these 7 principles because it goes outside of just the instruction. It goes outside of just the assessment. It goes into ourselves and our school environment as well as our classroom environment. It includes some SEL. It includes culturally relevant curriculums. It includes more than what we just think of culturally responsive teaching. And I do, when I think of culturally responsive teaching versus culturally relevant curriculum, you really can't have effective culturally relevant curriculum if you are not a culturally responsive person yourself. And if anyone else has been taught similar students I have, they're going to tell you when you're faking it. They're going to tell you when you're not talking, you're not walking your talk. They're going to do that. And I tell my kids that I want them to do that. So one of the experiences I had a young girl named Litzy, and I said her name wrong in class. And I was like, oh, okay. It was my 2nd year teaching. And she's like, you never say sorry. She goes, you said my name wrong. And I think maybe some teachers would have been upset that she responded that way, but instead I took a step back and I thought, this is a teachable moment for me. And this is my opportunity to build a relationship with her. So what I said was, you're right. I'm sorry I said your name wrong. That would really upset me if that happened to me. So I apologize. And that is something that humility piece where we create, I'm personally inviting. That's not just I'm doing it at the beginning of the year. I'm doing that constantly, being humble in my practice. And I'm also owning up when I make a mistake. So this quote, for students to become and remain actively engaged in their learning experiences, there must be high interest material that reflects their lives. Now, I'm really excited some of you liked that breakout room. I love breakout rooms. We're going to do a breakout room for this question. And then what I'll do at the end is just kind of go over what this looks like when I present to adults, the things that I think are really essential, and then some example activities, and then a reflection. Okay, so I'm going to do the breakout room. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. We're going to, oh, there we are. Breakout rooms. You're going to be with the same people. If you want to do a breakout room, like when you're doing continuous learning, you can do that. You just have to exchange groups. But for this purpose and for PDs like this, I keep people with similar groups because you want to build that tone and trust at small tables and have discussions. And that's hard to do when you're moving around so much, if that makes sense. Start with building a really core group with people and go from there. So we're going to open these rooms and ready, set, go.
high interest material that reflects their lives, what does that look like in your classroom?
Okay.
That's a tough one. I really
I'm
don't
thinking
know.
of posters that I used to have in my classroom as a teacher, does not reflect anyone's life but mine, because they're all made by, you know what I'm saying? Like,
Yeah.
I'm just sitting here thinking, I'm like, doesn't reflect any of the differences that are in my Bonner Springs school district.
You're probably right. I don't think, to be honest, I don't think even reflect me. It's,
I mean, if we think about, what does that look like? I mean, it starts by what's on my walls, like, is there something inviting for a student that is identifying with a different sex? I mean, how do I make them feel comfortable? And I think it starts with, what does my room look like?
Yeah, I think most teachers decorate or structure their room based on either one, the context of how do I let my students know who I am? So it's a bunch of stuff about you, what you're into, those types of things, or what kind of things are we going to do in here? From whether it's subject matter or topics or, parts of the year, what we're going to cover. So I don't know that I've ever been in, and I haven't been in a ton of classrooms, but I don't know what that even looks like.
Just gets me thinking about just even the decoration of my classroom. Kelly talked about, different textbooks. I was the math teacher, and I didn't teach from my textbook because I just thought all of the word problems in there were not relevant to where we lived anyway. So I just tried making math more relevant to where the kids were at. And so I did a lot of, but to be honest, I was in a rural area and everyone was white. We had a few kids that came from a Spanish background because they were migrant workers. And actually they were way better students than any of the white kids because they had to, otherwise their parents couldn't keep their jobs, honestly. But I didn't bring in
all the time. Sorry.
Right,
And that can be, it's just putting it back on them. Like, I've got a difficult name to say. Now we can ask Kelly for sure, though.
Right.
Yes.
We were wondering what the question was.
Yes. So the question was, well, it's the quote, for students to become and remain actively engaged in their learning experiences, there must be high interest material that reflects their lives. What does this look like in your classroom?
Okay.
So that could be a multitude of ways. That could be like physically, what does this look like? It could be, so things on the wall, this and that. This could be the resources you use. This could be you in general. It's really how you want to take it.
Well, one class that Olathe brought on board this year, I think, Julie, a couple schools have done it a couple years now, right? The women's studies and the Black American history.
Yeah, we went, Tina took a group of us to Park Hill South High School, and they have 4 elective classes that they do every other year. They have the Black American history, women's studies, Latin American history, and Asian history. And so we have picked up 2 of those classes. But one thing we did talk about is we spent the day there and we observed these, the 2 classes they had currently going on, which are the 2 that we have now, the Black American history and women's studies. And they had a student panel that we were able to ask questions and hear their perspective and so forth. And we really heard all kinds of really great things. And one of the things we asked them is, does it make a difference what the teacher looks like, so to speak, who teaches like Black American history? Does it matter to you as a student that it's an African American teacher? And same with women's studies. Does it have to be a female to teach women's studies class in order for it to be, to feel authentic feel like valid, I guess. I don't know if there's another way to say that. And they really overwhelmingly said it didn't matter. That they can tell pretty quick if the teacher is passionate enough about the material and for different cultures and accepting and stuff, that it didn't matter to them, which was
that has buffalo parts. And so we go through and we analyze all of the, buffalo parts and what they could be used for and things like that. And it's a good way to think about, where some of them would, say like, oh, they would use a bone to like scrape all of this stuff and say, well, guess what, guys? You can't go to Walmart. You can't go to Home Depot. That's where all of this stuff came from. And you'd have to work with what you have. But Kelly, as you're coming in, we were having a really good conversation and talking about how, especially in history, looking at bias in like primary sources, knowing that a majority of the official written stuff that you're supposed to use and whatever tends to come from only one perspective. And how I know in my class, I have people use the historian most. I say, well, everybody during this time, you don't know that. You didn't know everybody during that time. Everybody didn't write anything down. If it's a majority view, you say most, but then we also take a look at the other perspective, and you have to look where stuff comes from. And talking about how I know with a lot of my stuff, trying to compartmentalize so that kids understand the perspectives before we move on. So like I gave the example of westward expansion and taking a look at like studying the Oregon and Santa Fe Trail. Well, dominantly the people that were traveling on those were the white settlers that were moving, but then adding in and saying that, well, and from the Native American perspective, they were actually happy that the trails were making them move further on down the trail and not settle in their land. And so because of that, a lot of times you see those old movies of cowboys and Indians fighting on the trail. And although that sometimes happened, a lot of times the Native Americans were very happy to get them to move down the trail and to get them to go and settle in other places. So, but if you try to blend it too much and like not let stuff tend to sink in a little bit, I find that kids get really confused and then they don't understand any perspective like without saying, okay, this is this perspective, this is this perspective, this is this perspective. And that's where we start to learn about what actually happened.
Yeah, I think that's great. I think one of the, like I said earlier in Minnesota, one of the things, anytime we included a project, you had to have, so let's say colonialism, we had to, part of our standards were you had to use that project, but do it in two perspectives. Same with exploration. And they just picked two because you could really pick a lot. But it was something that just opened their mind. And in Minnesota, it was as diverse as most of my other experiences, but I would argue even in a school that's not as diverse, I would still want to do that. So they're learning about the actual people's history of the United States, not just one portion of it. So I like that. Awesome. Yeah. I'm going to go back and then I'm going to bring everyone back in. Okay. That's pretty cool. You all came back so quickly. It's like you had a heads up.
It's like we knew.
Like you knew. Yeah, the breakout rooms are really nice. As an instructional coach, I don't have a group of students that I'm doing sessions with, but this is something that I would definitely want to use if I were. But as a teacher, especially when I taught middle school, I would make sure to go into each room and record the session. Because middle schoolers are squirrely.
Oh, yeah.
Which I love them for that. Let's just see where everyone's at. Okay. Got like 8 seconds left. There we go, I think. Yep, I think I have everyone. Awesome. Okay, to go back and just share my screen again. Really loved the conversations that I heard. You're all rock stars. Really going to do it. Some of the things, just to kind of clarify too, like this could be physical. This could be personally. This could be as a school-wide class, what's on our walls. It's just more than one thing. Something that I did as a middle school social studies teacher, I had kids create self-made flags. And they had to include 5 perspectives of who they were. And those were hung up on my wall. Now I had 120 kids, so I had 120 flags. So they had to be kind of like not too big of flags. But it was something where they could see and come in. And then it was really fun to see the kids when parent-teacher conferences come in or back to school night, they could point to their flag to their parent or guardian. And it just like, that's mine up there. And yes, I had pictures of myself, this and that, and my family. I always included the Lebanese flag because it was something that it's a very large part of my family upbringing. Like instead of Thanksgiving dinner, we do Lebanese dinner, and we just do all Lebanese food. It's really fun. We have Lebanese wedding traditions that we do. One of them is like a scarf dance, and you take this family heirloom scarf and you dance around your husband, and it's supposed to help with fertility. It's really weird, but it's something that we do. It's part of our culture. Not that you needed to know all that, but now you do. Part of it as a classroom library, I don't think that's just limited to language arts and social studies teachers. I think a classroom library could be in any content area teachers. It shows the kids that you're a lifelong learner, that you're willing to read what they're reading. And when I had a homeroom, I would have each kid, and this is different for each teacher, I know that. Especially when we did book fair, I was like, which book do you want? And then I would surprise them with this book, and we would have it in our classroom library, and at the end of the year, I would give them the book, and I'd write a note in it. Something else, posters to showcase different, if you go to, there's, I saw on Pinterest, it's like women in STEM, and it was all women of different ethnicities, language, and those are posters that I would hang up, even as a social studies or language arts teacher. Something I started at Shawnee Mission West was a women in leadership cohort, because as a woman in going through my education, I never saw a woman as a principal. That's something I remember. I remember telling a teacher I want to be a lawyer, and he said, well, what about a teacher? And I'm happy I became a teacher, don't get me wrong, but what would my life look like if I was told to achieve the dream that I thought I was capable of achieving? So that is something, I just took some of that stuff into my own hands, school-wide as well as classroom-wise. I'm going to then just share my screen about one more time, just to kind of go over just some of the things so you see them before we stop our session together. Some things that I just want to make clear: when you are leading this professional development with staff, which you're all more than capable of doing, if you haven't already, create a working agreement document. So in that space, yeah, you can show them the 4 agreements, but create a working agreement that you all agree upon. Have them in small groups, and they have to share one agreement, so we have them in small groups in 4 to 5, and they all created agreements. And then we created this ship, because we're the Vikings, this ship. And then we have these agreements around the ship. And it's like empathy and listen to listen. And it's more pieces than just those 4 agreements, or really they all fit under those 4 agreements, but it was something we created together. I'm sorry. Show your why. So I show something I was big in. I like data. So I showed our data of the past 20 years. Shawnee Mission West looks quite different 20 years ago to now. We did 20 years ago, 10 years ago, and then now. And we did race and ethnicity, and we also did free and reduced lunch. 20 years ago, we only had 100 students who were free and reduced lunch, and this year we have 800. That's a very different look on things. So you have to show your why. Oh, sorry. Have to show that why. Building your tone and trust. You have to have that tone and trust with staff together. Create a common language. This was something, we have common language across our entire district through the Deep Equity program, but that's important so we don't have multiple definitions for what inclusion is. Share your personal culture and journey through discussions. We each have our own journey. We each have our own culture. Getting to know one another and our culture is really important, especially if we're expected to, we have to get comfortable with sharing it so kids are comfortable with sharing theirs. And then, I mean, I live by this. Adult learning theory is not too different from student learning theory because it's all human learning theory. We're humans. We strive better in discussion-based platforms. We will achieve more when we understand the why, not just the what. So those 5 things, if you're going to implement culturally responsive teaching, I would try to implement those 5 things within it. Discussion base is really important. That's why I chose the breakout rooms. I really like the in-person style of culturally responsive teaching, but the breakout rooms help you have those small conversations rather than just one person talking about it the entire time. Some activities you can do, self-assessment for a culturally responsive classroom. I self-assess myself quite often, and there's another one in there. There's a couple self-assessments in there if you're looking for that through Teaching Tolerance and Project Implicit. If you're wanting to do that, it's just really nice to see where I'm at and where I can grow and reflecting on that. Something that I've done before is the 7 principles. We've created why, how, and what circles. Why is this principle important? How do we implement it? And then what does it look like? This is probably one of the first articles I read, creating culturally responsive and inclusive classroom. I really like it. It gives some ideas. It's a really good place to start, especially for staff. So I have staff in my building who have never been introduced to this before. They've never had conversations around this. And we're all at different points in our journey, but we're all on a journey. So this was a really good starting point article, and I had them pick one of the examples and how can you implement it in your classroom. I think there's 11. Are there any questions so far? I know we're a little past 4 and I don't want to take up too much of your time. I'm just really happy that you're all here and you're the ones that are really in front of our students. Okay. The last thing I would really love for you to do is just through the Flipgrid discussion board that the Edcamp has set up, which is awesome. Just explain why it's important and how you will implement culturally responsive teaching into your own classrooms. If you could do that, and then it gives us an opportunity to really learn from each other, because what one of you are thinking could really, and maybe that's not something I've thought of before. I'm like, ooh, I could take that back to my building and share it out. So we're always learning, we're always getting better. And this is just one of those ways to do it. Good? You all are amazing. Thank you so much. I really appreciate you. And I hope you have a wonderful week in this continuous learning journey. Thank you again. If you have anything, my email's on the doc. I'm more than happy to help in any way. All right, I'm going to let you all go. Bye. Thank you all so much. I really appreciate it.